The Magi were in the Far East, probably in Babylon or Persia. They were steeped in the academics and the religious traditions of those countries, Babylon and Persia. And as I already said, that's nowhere near a biblical worldview. Their lifestyle and religion was a mixture of sorcery and divination, superstition, astrology, science, math, and studying religious texts and prophecy. Stereotypically, we might describe the Magi this way: highly educated and super smart, but superstitious, sorcery practicing, tea leaf reading, stargazing, dream interpreting, scientist, mathematician, historian, astrologer, priests from the East.
Rocking you up for Jesus Christ with classic style hard rock music and practical Bible teaching.
After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem, and they asked, "Where is the one who has been born the King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east, and we have come," I love this phrase, "to worship him." But when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. You'd think he'd be excited. This is awesome. But King Herod's kind of neurotic and power hungry, and he didn't want anybody taking his power. So he's disturbed. And when he had called together all of the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them, "Where is the Christ?" That's who this is really about. "Where's Messiah, the anointed one? Where is he to be born?" "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied. "For this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly, and he found out from them the exact time that the star had appeared. He wants to know when the star appeared, because the star would have marked the moment of his birth. Okay, how long did it take you to actually get here? We're going to learn that it took him 2 years to actually get everything together and arrive in Jerusalem. And so he wants to know, when did the star appear? Because he's calculating, how old might this child be? Which is why later we read that Herod gave the order to execute all the babies in and around Bethlehem 2 years old and younger. And so he sent them to Bethlehem, and he said, "Now go and make a careful search for the child. When you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star that they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. The word child is important. He's not a baby anymore. Jesus is about 2 years old by this point. And when they saw the star, they were overjoyed, and coming to the house, we're not in the manger anymore, we're in a house. They saw Jesus and his mother Mary, and they bowed down and they worshiped him. And then they opened their treasures, and they presented him with gifts of gold and incense and of myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. Now, I don't know about you, I love underdog stories. Somebody or a team who's not supposed to win, but somehow they do. They find a way to beat the Goliath, to overcome, to be successful. I always think about Rocky, right? I'm a big Rocky fan. I love Rocky Balboa. And I've watched them all 100 times. Know so many lines, I could bore you to death, with really bad imitations of Rocky Balboa. But anyway, love it. 10 years old when my dad took me to see the first one, and I've just been a huge fan ever since. Just massive underdog. Think about Rudy. I can't help it. I'm a Notre Dame fan. You know how that goes. But Rudy, what a great movie of the little 5'0", 100 pound kid that says when he's 6 years old around the dinner table, "I'm going to play for Notre Dame." And everybody's like, "Yeah, right." And he does. It's awesome. Most of us probably wouldn't connect underdog with the Magi. But you know what's cool? As I studied this week, it was really just striking to me how truly amazing and remarkable it is that these stargazing academics from 1,000 miles away, who did not grow up in any sense around biblical culture or the people of Israel, find their way to the house of the Savior to worship him. It is truly amazing. Let me paint us a picture for you of who these guys were. They're really fun to study. The Magi were in the Far East, probably in Babylon or Persia, in that area. They were steeped in the academics and the religious traditions of those countries, Babylon and Persia. And as I already said, that's nowhere near a biblical worldview at all. Their lifestyle and religion was a mixture of sorcery and divination, superstition, astrology, science, math, and studying religious texts and prophecy. Stereotypically, we might describe the Magi this way: highly educated and super smart, but superstitious, sorcery practicing, tea leaf reading, stargazing, dream interpreting, scientist, mathematician, historian, astrologer, priests from the East. Not the kind of people you would think would be in the first in line to worship Jesus, but these were. And honestly, as I began to spend time in this text, I kind of got the idea that the ones who made the trip kind of break that mold. Not all the Magi did come. Only this group of Magi really felt compelled to make this trip, to seek out the Christ, and to make this journey across hostile territory with a treasure to offer it to the king and worship him. Let's just kind of bring this to our world and how things work. It's one thing to sit around and talk about the scriptures. It's one thing to talk about things in an academic way. These guys are total academics. They're sitting around study hall in Babylon U. They're sipping their coffee and they're talking about the texts and prophecies and astrology and whatever else they study. And one of them says, I saw that star the other night. That's pretty cool. You think that might be that messianic thing that it's talking about that king way over there in Israel? Yeah, that might be. And it's fun to have discussions about those things and compare texts and notes and things from class and all that. It's a whole other thing to say, I'm going there. Because here's what we got to understand. It took them 2 years to get this trip together. Here's the deal. We always say there's 3. That's tradition. There's a lot more than 3 guys who made this trip. Because they've got to get supplies and food and camels, unless they just want to walk every step, which riding a camel doesn't seem like a whole lot better. Have you seen the camel at Road to Bethlehem? Everybody said, don't go to the camel. He'll either bite you or spit on you. I said, okay, I'll just watch him from here. That's cool. I mean, this is not a luxury trip. They had to get all these supplies together. On top of that, they had to amass what really would be a small fortune in terms of the gold and the incense and the myrrh. These are gifts for a king. And as Danny alluded to, it was God's provision, many believe, for Joseph and them, who later would have to finance a trip to Egypt to escape Herod. Then they're going to take 2 months and walk from Babylon to Israel with no guarantee that they'll find him. I mean, it's like, hey, let's walk to Los Angeles to Smithville and find this kid. How easy is that going to be, right? But they say, I'm going to go. And I just see something really unique in that. I see something going on. They're compelled. They're moved. It's almost like the Holy Spirit's involved. There's some really interesting passages in the book of Daniel that help us understand who the Magi were. Daniel was super familiar with the Magi. Daniel, of course, is one of the books in the Old Testament, and it's during what's called the exile period of God's people. When God's people didn't keep their eyes on the Lord, there were times when God had to allow them to be overrun by enemies in order to get their attention. And at one of these points, about 500 years before Jesus, God used Babylon and a king named Nebuchadnezzar to sweep down and conquer Judah and carry off many of its people into exile or slavery in Babylon, which is where these Magi were from. So about 500 years before Jesus, this happens, and Daniel is among the Hebrew boys who are taken off as slaves. Well, the king was very interested in any of those that showed promise, and Daniel was among the brightest of those, and so he put him in charge of the Magi. Listen to what it says here in Daniel chapter 5, verse 11. During Nebuchadnezzar's reign, this man, this is a reference to Daniel, Daniel was found to have insight and understanding and wisdom like that of the gods, from the Babylonians' perspective. And Nebuchadnezzar made him chief over all of the magicians and the enchanters and the astrologers and the fortune tellers of Babylon. Those are the Magi. So Daniel's in charge of them. And so through Daniel, this group of people, Daniel's a great man of God. Daniel loves the Lord. And it's an incredible story to read about Daniel in the lion's den and all of that. Daniel would have taught them about God. He would have taught them about the prophecies having to do with Messiah, who the Messiah was going to be, and even about this star that would rise. In Numbers chapter 24, verse 17, there's this little obscure verse, and it says, a star will rise over Jacob, And it goes on to speak of one who will come. Awesome little passage. Now here's what's cool about this. This is 500 years before it actually takes place that Daniel works with the Magi. So feel this. Our nation's roughly 250 years old, twice that long. For twice that long, after Daniel passes, generation after generation of Magi passed on to the next generation what Daniel had taught them about these prophecies, along with everything else that they studied, about this little passage, about this star that would rise. And for 500 years, they'd go out and check out the horizon and watch the stars, which was part of their regular practice. And one day, these Magi went out and said, there it is. Can you imagine? We're the ones. We're the generation. And there it is. And they recognized it for what it was. They saw, this is it. And so they don't just sit down with their buddies and talk about it. They organize a trip. They say, we have to go to Israel. We have to go find this child. We have to amass gifts that are worthy of a king. We have to get protection and resources to make this 2-month journey so that we can go find this baby. And this is amazing to me. They're going to go 2 years of planning or whatever, and 2 months of travel and walking across so that they can do this. Here's your gifts. Let's walk back. I mean, think about that. That is amazing. But they were compelled when they saw this star. Matthew chapter 2, verse 2. They traveled to Jerusalem, the head city, the capital city of Israel, which makes sense. If you were coming to America and you wanted to know what was going on in terms of, the country, you'd go to Washington because you'd be under the illusion that they knew what was going on in the country. All right? Nothing's changed. They're under the illusion that Herod has a clue. And they think if anybody knows about the prophecies and the coming king in Israel, the folks in this building ought to know, right? The palace. So they go in and they ask, where is the one who has been born the king of the Jews? We saw his star in the east. You guys surely know about that, right? Aren't you as excited as we are? I mean, we just walked 2 months to get here. What are you guys doing to celebrate it? Nothing. They don't even know about it. I just find it interesting that the people that lived in the backyard of Bethlehem, they didn't know. But some group totally removed that we would have probably written off and said, oh, they're not believers or whatever. They're the ones that traveled to come see him. We've come to worship him. The word worship means to ascribe worth, to fall down before and praise and adoration and surrender and to lift him up. This is not just an academic field trip. This is a 2-year process, 2-month-long journey through hostile territory to bring treasures and worship to the King of Kings. We talk about gold and incense and myrrh and those gifts that were given, and that's wonderful and that's true. But the greatest gift of the Magi was none of that. It was their surrendered heart. That's what drove them. That's what compelled them. That's our gift as well. Now, I came across an interesting video this week, kind of just seeing what lots of different people had to say along this or about this. And all of a sudden I heard somebody talking about the NBA, the Basketball Association, right? Professional basketball. And they were talking about how NBA teams, they play games on Christmas Day. And so they go to great lengths to arrange the schedules for the players to make sure that they get some time off to celebrate Christmas. And the operative phrase that they used in this video was, so that they don't miss Christmas. And I heard one player, or one player was quoted as saying, there's no game in the world that's worth missing Christmas for. So it got me thinking, what does it mean to miss Christmas? How do you miss Christmas? I mean, really, it's only the biggest, most popular, most celebrated, most advertised, almost to the point of like, man, turn it off, holiday in the world, right? Kelly and I were in Walmart this fall. It was the day after Halloween, and they're playing Christmas music. And I'm like, do we just skip Thanksgiving now, or what's going on, right? I mean, just, how do you miss this? And yet, millions of people fly through the holidays with all the lights and the food and the parties and the music and festivities and all that stuff and completely miss what it's all about. So I found a little passage in 2 Chronicles that I think gives us some insight as to why maybe that happens. And maybe it will encourage and challenge us this morning. 2 Chronicles chapter 16, verse 9. God is always on the alert. He is constantly on the lookout for people who are totally committed to him. In other words, God's looking for people who are looking for him. He's seeking after hearts that are seeking after him. Oh, the Magi are such a great example of this. The greatest gift that the Magi gave Jesus was the gift of their heart, their commitment, their surrendered life. And that's the greatest gift that we can give him this morning as well.